What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Have a super fun day in store for you today. I'm heading to get some lactate testing done to see when I produce lactate, how long I can maintain a pace at my lactate threshold. There's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to have Mark, who I'm going to see to do the testing, explain all this to you. But I'm excited to dive in. We got to head over there. It's about 50 minutes away from where I live, but I'm super stoked to try this test out, meet Mark, have him take me through some threshold testing, and see if this data can help me at all with improving my marathon speed, pace, time, running, all that fun stuff. So let's go. Let's do it. All right, guys. So we are here in Waterloo with Mark. He's going to take me through the lactate test. I'm going to have him explain all the fancy stuff because I'm not totally well versed in it. I'll have him introduce himself and share with you a little bit of what we're going to do today. So Mark,
what's up, guys? Yeah, so my name is Coach Mark Cullen. We're out here in beautiful Waterloo, my stomping grounds, and we're going to do some blood lactate testing today. I love this stuff, been doing it on a bunch of my athletes recently. I honestly think it's the gold standard in testing. Takes the subjective part out of it and really allows us to just run paces and see what the blood is doing during that time. So this stuff's awesome for, first of all, testing and retesting over time. We can see improvements in that blood lactate curve, but also dialing in your training zones and racing zones so you make sure you know what is going to be sustainable for that. And also adjusting your training so you can shore up on any weaknesses, make sure that you're really getting ready for the specific demands of your race. So the protocol we use for this, we'll do some blood testing on Dalton at rest after a warm-up, and then we'll do it progressive 5-minute steps. So we start out super easy on these early ones, and we'll build pretty much to max pace by the end, dropping about 20 seconds per kilometer each of these steps along the way until he gets to max. So the last one's really gonna hurt. And essentially what we're looking for in this is there's a couple key things. So first, we kind of have the first steps that are below what we call our LT1, which is our aerobic threshold. And during this spot, this is kind of an area where we're using mostly fat as a substrate for our fuel during this. And lactate stays pretty steady, kind of around that baseline below 2 millimoles of lactate. And then once we cross that LT1, so for most people, this LT1 is kind of the upper end of zone 2 for most people, if you're talking about that 5-zone model. And then once we cross that LT1, we start to see a decent kick up of lactate for every sort of pace that we move along during this. So for a lot of people in this, between LT1 and LT2, which I'll talk about in a second, is where a lot of people's half marathon or marathon pace falls, typically in that area. And we start to see a steady kick up of lactate, but it's something that the body can still kind of handle and use during that time. Body's starting to use more carbs as fuel and a little bit less of fat during that section. And then what happens as we continue to move on, we hit LT2, which is our anaerobic threshold. So you'll commonly hear people talk about threshold training. They're usually working around this sort of pace. And that's usually around 4 millimoles of lactate. And after you cross that, the lactate really starts to rise quickly and it becomes unsustainable for long periods of time. So for this, most people you'll have kind of in the 5 to 10K pace or up to max pace in this part. And it's just, your body's gonna fatigue because the lactate is rapidly accumulating this during this time, and your body's just gonna shut you down at some point. So we'll hit kind of our peak lactate in this part. And yeah, that's kind of the protocol, and tells you the blood kind of numbers will really tell us what's happening at each of those paces and really be able to customize things for Dalton going forward.
Do you think, I know I sent you a little bit of data, but do you think you could guess what my lactate threshold may be?
Yeah,
I'd be curious to hear because I have a number in my head. I'd be curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, I'll write them down before, and we can do a predictor after. I don't want to put things in your head.
That's a good idea. I have a number in my head, so I don't want to.
I bet you I've seen some of your workouts. You sent me some of the data, so I bet you we could predict pretty close, but I also think you'd be surprised at maybe where some of that LT1 lies. I think you'll be pretty dialed in on LT2, especially off field, because you really feel that difference between when you cross over that LT2, things just, your breathing is much more rapid. You start to flood in the legs. You've probably really felt that. But the LT1 is the really interesting one where people, especially new runners who haven't developed
you don't really know where it's at.
Yeah, they haven't developed it. And a lot of new runners, their LT1 is super low. But maybe they came from a sport background and they can actually have a pretty solid LT2 and threshold and a pretty solid top end, but they really need to start easy, where some of those more developed marathoners, triathletes, like their LT1 can actually be very close to LT2.
Like for you guys, I think something I've been talking about, trying to go sub 3.
Yep.
So like to go sub 3, you'd have to hold like a 4:15 per kilometer pace. So if we did this test and it showed up that my lactic threshold was at like a 4:15, that would not be a good thing. Because ideally I want that lactic threshold to be a lot higher than that, because I want to maintain 4:15 per kilometer for, you know, sub 3-hour marker, versus like your LT2 or your lactic threshold would be something you can hold for an hour.
Yeah.
So if that comes up today, that won't be good. I don't suspect that's going to be the case, but just so you guys get a little bit of a sense for like what it means for me trying to go sub 3. And a big reason why I'm doing this is to get a little bit more info on like how I can dial in some of my workouts, like my threshold workouts, and kind of knowing where those things are. I've never really done anything like this, and I've never really run a true 5 or 10K like PR race, so I don't have a lot of data points outside of like my marathon. So it's going to be good to get some data that I can use to kind of like better dial in some of these workouts. So we'll try and get some footage, take you guys through it, and we'll have some fun. This is definitely your mobile lab.
Yeah, I love this thing. The pricks don't hurt too much, so. Some nicer bubbles now. Got it there.
So theoretically, this should be lower.
I would assume so, since you've started warming up, or it might be.
Clears the lactate.
It's just your aerobic metabolism finally kicks in and starts to get a little more leveled off. It's still probably gonna.
Yeah.
If you haven't fully warmed up, especially because it's cool as well. Like, so we're gonna do on these 2.5 minutes out, 2.5 minutes back, and then you'll get about a minute between each of them just while we're taking the next sample. Then you'll roll right into the next one, but we're gonna start at 5:30 per kilometer, and then we'll chop it down by 20 seconds each time. Makes sense, starting to go down. And we'll do the exacts after. Right, still hanging around in there. 4:53.
So how many sets usually does it take people?
Something around 7 steps is usually pretty good. Still hanging there. Nice. So let's keep just cutting down by 15 seconds. So 4:40 on this one.
Legs are starting to warm up a little bit.
Sweet. Ooh, still hanging there. That's good.
It's crazy. So that was like my marathon pace
Yeah.
a year ago.
Sweet.
Yeah, definitely.
What's your guess?
I'm gonna say 2.2.
Maybe a little higher? 2.8?
Oh yeah, definitely way higher.
Not much
That makes
higher.
sense. I felt
It
that
makes
for sure.
total sense. I would
Oh yeah.
probably getting close up there in the 3 point
Yeah, I felt
something.
like that was a hard effort.
Oh, right on it pretty much. Cool. All right, so we need to get at least one more step in here. Might not have to do a full 5er, but 4.9. Nah, okay, you're gonna have to do a 5er.
What was that last time? 4.8?
The one before? No, 4.0.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, T's. I feel like this one we got them almost bang on.
Oh,
Yeah,
There it is.
Dunzo. Good job.
All right, guys, we just wrapped up. A little tired. Wrapped up the lactate testing. A lot of fun. Definitely pushed me more than I was thinking it was going to push me, which is always a good thing. Today's supposed to be my hard day, so it definitely was hard. But we're going to have Mark go through some of the numbers and data and see what he thinks about some of the stuff that we did today.
All right, Dalton crushed it today. We got to pump everything in the algorithm, so we'll get him to share kind of the exact final results along the way. But let's take a look at our results here. So we started out, we always take a reading after the rest and warm up section. So there we had about 2 millimoles of lactate, which you'll see is very interesting. Until that aerobic metabolism kicks in, a guy like Dalton who's running 100K a week, like it takes a little bit for that to kick in. So you can see as he started to get warm up, the lactate actually starts to go down. So he did roughly 520 per K on this section, and it starts to go down to about 1.5. And then like we were talking about before, it stays steady in that aerobic metabolism below LT1. So in that 510, 455 range, he was still holding around 1.8, nice and steady. And then we found around 440 per kilometer, we start to get near that LT1, which is about 2 millimoles. So this is kind of going to be a new spot where he can maybe look on days he's feeling good and refreshed, that he could maybe go in the upper zone 2 range on this stuff. And then from there, you can tell right away from his breathing, his effort, things start to kick up. So we went 420 per kilometer on this next section, got up around 2.8. And then our next one where we started to push it and found around that LT2. So that anaerobic threshold was right around 405 per kilometer. And then 2 hard ones to finish, a 355 per kilometer, 5 millimoles. And then a nice hard one. I think he was around, what did you end up on that one?
342, I think.
342,
Yeah.
so around 7 millimoles of lactate, which that's flooding the muscles in that one. So like good, like for somebody who wants to try and run a sub-3 marathon like that, you need that to be below LT2. So he's in a pretty good spot here, given that we are in the middle of a training block. He didn't taper anything going into this. So you think when you go into a race, some more time to build fitness, taper into a race that ideally he can hold in that sort of 415 range for a long period of time and not break down. There's a lot of elements to a marathon between nailing your nutrition, nailing the pacing on it, not surging too much, and having that depth of fitness from the long runs and long kilometers in your training to actually deliver the performance. But honestly, when we look at this, the kind of lactate shows that it is going to be possible. So he's just got to put all the elements together. So no pressure, bud.
With the algorithm, like what does that spit out in terms of like what we'll see?
Yeah, so I'm going to punch in all of the lactate numbers and the speed and kind of the steps within each of those. And it just kind of gives clearly defined sort of
Like
numbers around LT1 and LT2, taking into account all of the data in there. So sometimes that'll mean based off of there, maybe the LT1 or LT2 is a little bit higher or lower than what we put there. But we also got to remember, depending on what you're coming into that day in terms of fatigue, that these thresholds can kind of change day to day. So when I'm working with my athletes, it's always a range depending on how they feel on that day. And then I really want athletes to learn that feeling of what LT1 and LT2 is. So you should really be able to feel sort of things start to kick up when you get over LT1, that takes a little more focus, a little more breathing. You can't have those full conversations. And then once you hit that LT2, you know your legs start to flood quickly. The breathing's really rapid. You can't recover quickly, and the effort's just really mounting quickly. So athletes, if they can learn to feel those as well, that's really important because it'll change day to day as well.
And so then using, like, let's just say 405 was like kind of based off what we had there. It's like, how would you use that to program like a workout for me, let's say, knowing that data now?
Exactly. So I really want you to learn the feel of it first, but you can kind of go 2 different ways of it. So you can do either like extensive or intensive intervals. So we could start out and do a bunch of work in that 405 to 410 range. Maybe you start in the first week as like 8 by 800 with 200 meters in between them. With kind of a bit of a float between, you're maybe targeting 405 to 410, and then you extend those out to 1Ks, miles, 2Ks, with the ideal that by the time you get to 2Ks, it feels sort of the same as it did for those 800s, and that in itself is progress at that pace. Or the other one you can do is sort of intensive ones where you're looking maybe over some weeks to start at 405, keep the reps the same, and maybe you're inching it up to, if you start the first week at 407, maybe the next week is 405, 403, with the goal of it still, again, feeling the same, but you're doing either faster pace at that same effort or lactate, or longer intervals at that. So extensive or intensive, and you can do a combination of both too. So just finding ways to progress it week over week to help elicit adaptations around what you're trying to push, which an LT2 or a little bit below that would be something you want to push in a marathon specific block.
The reason I ask is like a lot of people, even for myself, it's like you hear these terms thrown around like threshold training, but no one really might not understand it. And there is a lot of like, the more I've learned about it, like the benefits of knowing a little bit more about that, even like if you're not super accurate with doing some type of test like this, like understanding what the effort should feel like, or like what paces you should be maybe estimating to aim for to get like the benefit of the workout. And I think like for a lot of new runners, you don't need all that like data like to have it. It's like, I think a lot of perceived exertion can really like help you get there. But I think like for me, now that I've done that for long enough, like getting some actual data, and like I was telling you, like, as we were doing the cool down, like trying to push something as challenging for me as like a sub-3 to have a little bit more insight into that is like super, super helpful. Could you let people know where to find you and all the stuff you guys do? I think it'd be awesome if anyone's interested in doing this.
Yeah, so best spot to follow me is Mark Cullen Coach on Instagram. So I post lots of good content there, and you can always send me a message if you have questions around training, or I'd offer like free consultations that you can pop in for a quick 15-minute call, see if I can help you out in your journey. And then the club I run is called LP Endurance, so we help a number of runners and triathletes as well. So you can find us at lpfit.ca or on Instagram at LP Endurance.
All right, guys, I just want to do a little outro to my video with Mark with regards to the lactate testing. First off, big thank you to Mark. Did a great job, super professional, had a great time being able to, connect with him a little bit and hear some of his perspectives on marathon training. If you aren't following Mark, follow him on Instagram. He puts out great content in the endurance space. He's a great coach. He's the head coach of LP Endurance, which is a local triathlon endurance club in Waterloo. So if you're in the area, highly recommend checking out them, checking their team out, checking out Mark. Can't say enough about my experience there. With regards to the results of the testing, super happy with how it went. I think the info is going to be good for me as I move into the rest of my training block, which are about 9 weeks out from the marathon, which is kind of getting into crunch time, which I'm excited about. But just looking at the data and seeing that, like, where my threshold is at and my goal pace for the marathon, physiologically, the opportunity to try and go sub 3 hours is there. Obviously, there's a ton that goes into the success of running a good marathon, but to have that data is great. I'm super excited to see what the next kind of 8 weeks of training does for me. I do think at some point, again, I will redo this test with Mark so that we can compare over time what has happened to my lactic threshold, where that's at. The most surprising thing to me, I think, was actually where my LT1 was, which is where my zone 2, high end of my zone 2 would be at 440 per kilometer. That was my biggest surprise from the whole day, which just shows me I can kind of push my zone 2 running a little bit farther into those paces. But outside of that, expected that to be the case, the numbers that showed up. Again, super excited about the opportunity to connect with Mark. Thank you guys for tuning into this video. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment. I'm going to be documenting some of the big prep workouts that are coming here over the next 8 weeks of training. So make sure you're checking out my YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, check me out on Strava, all that good stuff. And I hope you guys are getting after it, pushing your bodies, challenging yourself, and most importantly, digging deep. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.